Welcome back, and in the spirit of recycling and repurposing, here I am again. Two for the price of one. I'm really happy to be here, and actually I did message my mum to say, Mum, there's a Bollywood star here. So I think she's impressed. So we're here for our third panel discussion of the day, and we're keeping it short and punchy, another 20 minutes. And the focus now is on the digital renaissance, revitalising cultural economies in India and the UK. So what we're going to talk about here is with India and the UK budgeting for the promotion and awareness of heritage through a multitude of methods. How can both countries leverage technological and digital affordances to redefine the future of cultural economies and sustainable development? And I have got an utterly fabulous panel with me today. I've got Bettany Hughes, an award-winning historian, author and broadcaster whose speciality is global culture. She's the co-founder of the internationally focused production house Sandstone Global, that makes films and audio for BBC, Channel 4, National Geographic, Discovery, the History Channel and ABC, among many others. Her film Treasures of the World has been aired in over 120 countries and is regularly watched by 450 million people worldwide. That's quite a figure. Quite a figure. And I think I saw, maybe it was yesterday or today, but there was also an article in the Times in which you were featured. Was that today's Times?
It was yesterday's.
Yesterday's Times. So please look out for that too. Lovely to have you here. My second panellist is Mr. Sachin Duggal. Welcome, Sachin. You have such an impressive biography, and it's very difficult for me to edit because you've achieved so much in such a short space of time. Sachin is a serial entrepreneur whose AI-powered platform, Builder.ai, grew 300% last year and has raised over $195 million since 2018.
450.
Oh, sorry,
450 million.
450 million. That's the speed at which you're growing. I couldn't even keep up with my paperwork. Sachin started his career at the age of 14 by building PCs, and by the age of 17, he had built one of the world's first automatic currency abridged trading systems for Deutsche Bank. While still at university, he started a cloud computing company called Nevo, taking it to just under 100 million valuation before leaving university. Incredible. Lovely to have you here, Sachin. And then my other two panellists, we've got the lovely Mr. Duncan Dornan, visiting from Glasgow, up in Scotland. Duncan was recently appointed Head of Museums and Collections at Glasgow Life. After graduating from Edinburgh University, he worked in education for 16 years and was Head of Department with Aberdeen College. He joined the National Museums of Scotland as Museum Manager, working on the delivery of the National Museum of Rural Life, a partnership between the National Museums and NTS. Welcome, Duncan. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. And then finally we have Philip Sydenham, who's the first Secretary for Trade in Creative and Sport at the Deputy High Commission, and I believe normally based in India, is that correct?
Absolutely.
Philip leads on and promotes exports to overseas markets and spreads awareness on opportunities the UK offers to India and the rest of the world. Please can you give a warm welcome and applause to our fabulous panellists. Thank you. So if I may, I'd like to kick off with the person who's travelled the furthest to be here. Well, technically you have, but furthest in the UK. We're going to start with you, Duncan. Can you please share with us the approach you're taking in Glasgow around leveraging digital technologies for the protection and preservation of culture? And how are you involving your visitors, based on the fact also that you've got quite a large Indian diaspora in Glasgow? How are you involving your visitors in that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So in March last year, Glasgow Museums relaunched the Borough Collection following a 6-year refurbishment, a redisplay and reinterpretation of the collection of fine and decorative art. At the very start of the project, we were determined to utilise the potential in digital interpretation to broaden and to democratise our audience. As you rightly say, we have a very broad demographic in Glasgow. Almost 10% of our community are from South Asian heritage, so Scotland's most diverse city. And we're determined to see our audience in the museums reflect the full range of our communities. We know that digital is a very powerful tool to achieve that. Use of digital in fine executive art context was highly controversial. There was a concern that digital technology, because of the colours and the movement and the sound, would in fact overwhelm the collection and detract from the aesthetic and spiritual experience that people have in that form of museum. But we were confident that was not necessarily the case. We engaged very widely with users and non-users to develop the technology, exploring things like the length of digital content, how long people engage, the gaps between digital content to ensure people would be patient and wait to pick it up. We worked with audiences to develop some of that content, so for example with women's groups to examine the response and the context of some of the work by French Impressionist painters in the collection. And we also worked with current contemporary makers to explore the techniques and technologies in some of the objects represented in the collection, all to try to develop digital which would be effective within that context. And we also worked very hard to ensure the digital content was robust, because actually digital which doesn't work is much worse than having none at all, so the digital had to be reliably present as part of the core experience. In fact, we have more than 100 incidences of digital through the galleries, which is absolutely central to our interpretation. We also developed an approach to digital to identify all of the key learning techniques which people use, to ensure that our digital content represents all of those learning techniques across the galleries, and also digital content aimed at all of the key audiences. So regardless of how you learn, regardless of which segment of the audience you are, you will find digital content across the museum which is directly aimed at you and your needs. And that's proved highly effective. The public response to the digital was incredibly positive. It's a very powerful and important part of our content. The approach we've taken, responding with life-size digital and very muted palettes, means the digital genuinely supports the collection but doesn't overwhelm the collection and really adds to that serene and spiritual experience within the museum. One of the practical but really critical aspects of digital is that it allows us to move seamlessly between languages. So where conventionally in museums, multiple language provision would be primarily English, with the occasional panel available in one or two other languages. The digital in the bottom can flip seamlessly between 10 languages at the press of the screen, so the user can select the language. That means that we can genuinely reflect the language of all the people in Glasgow in the core interpretation, and that's a really important point. And that can be expanded very easily, and that capacity in digital is something which in the future I think will be increasingly important and absolutely gives equality of provision and equality of access.
So Duncan, can I ask you, that all sounds fantastic in terms of extending the reach of your collection through using digital technologies. What about people who might not be so comfortable with digital technologies? What about maybe older generations, or how are you maintaining and still building those audiences?
So one of the other aspects of digital in the gallery is to have something which doesn't require specialist skills, so the interface is really very simple and straightforward. So the digital isn't, as was commonly the case, an iPad in a stand which you operate as an iPad. The interface is very straightforward and simple, and that means that people can just touch and move in the area. Something you need to do nothing, just walk into the space and the digital content will activate. So it's really important to ensure that it's not something for a specialist, it's something for a general population. The next step in that process, beyond that digital in the gallery, which means that actually we have quite mobile content, is we're now looking at how that can expand into the online arena. That allows us to share our in-gallery content more widely, but also allows us to reach back into the collection to start to make use of those elements which are digital, particularly in relation to contemporary art collection. Much of that is natively digital, but actually is hidden away when it's no longer on a gallery display. So the online platform allows us to make that accessible, and also to make access to a general collections database accessible. And that, together with the language facility, means we can begin to reach out to other institutions in a much more meaningful way.
Fantastic. And so does this mean that you're now able to bring in digitally, virtually, audiences from India into Glasgow? Fantastic.
And possible to connect that directly using pre-existing content.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Duncan. Now I'm going to turn to Bettany, and I understand that you're working in India at the moment. and you've experienced the depth of living heritage and the vibrancy of India. Can you please briefly offer your thoughts on how digitalisation and living heritage can support sustainability?
Absolutely. We've just finished a series of films in India which go out on Channel 4 on the 9th of July. It was announced this morning. So
date your diary.
Please watch. Let us know what you think of them. So just very quickly before I start, two things. One is to say thank you to the Neri Centre, to our friends and academic colleagues here, because you've helped us with this agenda of using cultural industries and creative economies to really forward understanding of who we are and where we are in the world. And they're unparalleled in how they've managed to help us to do that. And also, just before I start, a really brief personal anecdote. I know it's always annoying often when people do this, but this is completely germane to our conversation, because it tells us that we should never be intimidated by what's going to happen in the future. I'm going to be really interested to hear what you talk about in terms of AI. So just to let you know why I'm so passionate about cultural heritage and have devoted my life to it. I was a historian back at the end of the 20th century when history was not popular. I don't know if you all remember this. The year 2000 was coming up, and there was this kind of notion that a massive reset button was going to happen, that the past was completely irrelevant, and that there was this sort of shiny, bright new future that we were all going to step in. Obviously, that didn't happen, and I was very aware that history wasn't appearing on television in the way it should. So I arranged a meeting with a BBC producer, sat down, with all my best stories about how inspiring this kind of reservoir of experience was from the past, how illuminating it is, how you can have cultural integration across time and space through history, and then realised one of those things when I was doing all of the talking. There was silence from the other side of the desk, and you could see the sort of tumbleweed blowing through the office. And this producer opposite me said, "Can I just tell you three things, my dear? One, nobody is interested in history anymore. Two, nobody watches history on television. And three, nobody wants to be lectured at by a woman." Now, this was in 1999, not 1899, but 1999. And as you can imagine, that put a certain degree of fire in my belly, and I thought I have to prove you wrong. And as you said, I've got two of my colleagues up here, Shiva Subramaniam and Dixie Stewart. We passionately make these history programmes. They are watched by 450 million people around the world, but also they seem to have a very cogent impact on behaviour. So a recent series we did about Egypt, when it went out, the Times reported on this. The bookings from the UK for cultural tours of Egypt went up by 4 times the next month. So it definitely changes behaviour. So just to explain why I really care about what I do, and then to answer your question very briefly, philosophically and practically and psychologically and actually physiologically, why this matters and why we can use digital media and other forms of media in an extraordinary way to help cultural heritage is, as a historian, I've always known that history matters. But thank goodness now, scientists are on our side, and we now know that we carry memory right across our brains. So when you access a memory, it's not like you sort of pull out a little chest of drawers. It's everywhere across your mind, and we cannot have a future thought unless we access a memory of some kind. So that might be the memory of an idea or an experience or something that has visual impact on us, but we need memory to move forward. So that's why we're automatically, almost instinctively drawn to books about history, to visiting monuments, to sharing memories. So memory matters. Neuroscientists also tell us that we're at our happiest when we're travelling, when we're moving, when we're walking. That's when our brain is in its alpha state. And that our minds seek disruption, so we seek the new. So if you put all that together, you think actually encouraging sustainable tourism by allowing people to cross borders and boundaries physically and mentally and psychologically, to experience the new, to immerse themselves in the lives of others, you're on a win-win situation. But as you say, it has to be sustainable, and I think that's where cultural heritage comes in. That rather than people travelling in order to sort of skim across the surface of the present when they go to a place, we should be encouraging them to deep dive into the well of time. So just you know, in kind of very minute terms, if you go to a country, don't go to 3 sites in one day. Go to one site for 1 week and stay there and really, really understand it. So that's something that in the programs that we make, we try to encourage people to do. We try to say, always travel understanding that you are a guest in someone else's country, and you should only be a guest if your host welcomes you. So travel with absolute respect, make it very clear the dynamic of that relationship. But also in these films that you'll see on Channel 4 on the 9th of July, we try to do things like when we go to the Taj Mahal, we could not go to the Taj Mahal, but we approach it from the back gardens, the kind of overgrown back gardens where we know Shah Jahan mourned his wife, which are open to the public, but a tiny handful of people go there rather than the 8 million who visit the Taj Mahal every year. When we talk about the spice trade in Kerala, we don't just go and meet a cook or a chef, we talk to a historian and expert on the cross-cultural exchange that the spice trade facilitated. And for instance, there are amazing Roman discoveries there that prove the Romans say this is the most beautiful country we've ever seen, and then the Tamil kings write about the Romans and say they have really good wine, the Italian wine is great. So it's those kind of stories that help people understand that we can live in 2 times at once, and that we can connected across time. And you know, Shiva Subramanian, who I've already given a shout out to, she was incredibly careful about making sure that we approached cultural heritage in that way, from the inside out rather than from the outside in. So it works as a model, and we've got so little time. I'm just going to leave you with 3 beautiful Proto-Indo-European words that I think help explain. I can't understand the future or the present unless I dive back into prehistory, and Amish has just come in. We're both fans of the Bronze Age. Basically, the Bronze Age is where it all happens. So these 3...
I'm a fan of Bettany too.
Yes, mutual fans. But these 3 very beautiful Proto-Indo-European words. One is Widtor, which means a wise agent. And Widtor gives us both the words history and wisdom. So by definition, understanding history makes you wise. There's another beautiful, beautiful word, which is Ghosti, Ghosti, which gives us our words guest and host. And baked into that notion is the idea that the guest and the host are one and the same, that you can't have one without the other, and that as a species we're programmed to want to welcome strangers across our threshold. There is something about hospitality that makes us human, so that sustainable tourism absolutely fits into that. And the final word, you will all know this I'm sure, but the word for man and mind and humankind all stem from a Proto-Indo-European root, men or manu, which means thought and thinking. So a man isn't a male thing, it's a thinking thing. And I think that we can use our minds to appreciate the value not just of artificial intelligence, but also of ancestral intelligence. And that's what history does. History reminds us to remember to think better.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bettany. I'd like us to now turn to Sachin. So Sachin, we can be in 2 places at once, according to Bettany, and this link between going into the future but taking ancestry with us. Where does that overlap with the work that you do?
Look, I think when you look at the advancements of technology, let's go beyond AI, there are 3 sort of core pillars that I think are relevant as you think about what the future of culture looks like, influenced by the past. And so, and some of these effectively layer into each other. Right? One is the ability to have a digital twin. So you're able to, in a way that a mass audience of a future generation wants to absorb, you're able to bring history into that. And I'll give you some examples of this. You know, I'm a huge tennis player. But the average age of someone who watches tennis is 65. And so the sport is dying because young people don't watch it. And you have to ask yourself why they don't watch it. Well, because nobody wants to watch a 5-set game when 64 players are playing. They all want to watch it when it's quarterfinals and it's Nadal or Djokovic. And what it shows you that the audience has moved on, and the format and the way they want to engage in the content is changing. And I think this goes to your earlier point. And so whether it's digital twins, whether it's how content is delivered, because history is very important, because knowing where you came from is a good way of knowing where you could go. And you don't want to make the mistakes of the past, but you'll be inspired from them. But you won't be inspired if it's not delivered in the way you want to absorb. I think the second is, how do you achieve that? Ultimately, every museum or every cultural institute needs to become software first in their thinking. But in most of these institutions, you don't have engineers or computer scientists that are leading the charge of thinking of the art of the possible. And so you end up having partnerships between these institutions and those that can build. The issue you have, though, is you have 500 million developers worth of demand and you have 50 million developers worth of supply. So it's amazing that they built it. I guarantee you there's a million cultural institutes around the world that cannot build it. Right? Either they can't find out how to build it, they can't get access to the resource. And so you need to empower people to do that. Now, the beauty with not only the work we do, but the work that artificial intelligence allows you to do is it really reduces the amount of human capacity needed to be able to build these immersive experiences, to be able to build digital twins, to be able to build a way that content can be absorbed. And then I think that the third layer to this is sort of more around the AI, which is, this is probably the second moment in history we have a Da Vinci period. The first moment in history was when Da Vinci was around. He was both an artist, an architect, a physicist, a mathematician. He built things. He wrote backwards so that he couldn't get persecuted. And you think about what's happening with AI today, we think it's a computer science problem, we think it's a policymaker's problem. Actually, it's both philosophy, art, literature, history, for simple reasons where, I can give you a couple of examples. I call it the turmeric problem. So you have a model, built by data scientists in London, owned by a company in the US. The data is labeled by someone in the Philippines. So someone labels turmeric. And then you ask yourself, in California, why do you use turmeric? Put it in a latte. You go to Bangalore, why do you use turmeric? Put it in a curry. You go to Vietnam, and why do you use turmeric? It's an anti-inflammatory. And so actually, there's a lot around context. Now that's a benign example. Now let's talk about something a bit more pungent. The British Empire.
I thought you were going to say garlic.
Or American independence. Imagine you just had a way of teaching it. I think what history teaches you is, and what culture teaches, there's not a single version of the truth. It's beauty in the eyes of the beholder. And so how you would teach those two events in history to a child in New York, to a child in London, to a child in Mumbai, fundamentally different. Yes, there was an empire. How it got built, how it went away, yes, there was American independence. Why it came about, why it went, who was right, who was wrong, they're all interpretations of the truth. And so the real reason why this is a Da Vinci period is we actually need all the stakeholders now to start embracing technology, to realize the ship has sailed and it's time to get on board, and then to actually help guide how the scientists and the computer scientists and the engineers and the mathematicians are actually designing it. Because if we don't, we'll end up getting a muted version of the truth, where today, unfortunately, those of you who've talked to Bard or Sydney or ChatGPT, it assumes volume is an indicator of accuracy. So the louder you can be, the more noise you can create, it assumes that is the truth. But we know that's not the case. In some cases, the smallest volume can be the truth, especially because you've got this thing called social media that can be easily manipulated or purchased. And so you've got to strike that balance. So I think it's such a fascinating time to be alive. But it's also the time where you need all the disciplines to come together. I keep saying, I really think this is Da Vinci version 2, because the things that he was hiding from, we don't need to hide anymore, but we all need to come together.
Fantastic, thank you, Sachin. So with India, hosting the G20 presidency, what would you like to put on the table that gets discussed at that level?
You know, I think it's and I said this in an earlier panel a couple of days ago, AI is the third trifecta. The first trifecta was cloud. We kind of all know about it, but don't really understand it. The second trifecta was social media, which we thought was just like a fun tool, but actually it's far more prolific. The third was actually the technology around AI and how it uses data, and we've failed to regulate the first two. We've sort of become, dare I say it, subservient to our American cousins. And I think now we have this opportunity with India and the UK and the G20 to start to create an equilibrium, because really what we do in the next 12 months will decide the fate for the next 100 years.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sachin. Maybe now is a good time for me to bring you in, Philip, with your responsibility of connecting the United Kingdom with India. What does a digital renaissance mean for trade between India and the UK, and what can we look forward to while India holds the G20 presidency?
Thank you, Hannah. And I really love what Sachin was just saying about this being a Da Vinci period, and I was going to talk along the same lines, that really we're seeing a revolution globally in the creative economy and in the cultural space as well, using digital means. And the UK and India have the power really to be leaders in that digital creative economy sphere, with both being very digitally driven but also highly creative economies. And maybe I just paint you a little bit of a picture of some of the stuff we're working on in that space, which exemplifies some of this. I think there's one bucket which is existing forms of creativity, of culture, which are being changed by digital. Look at things like film. It was great to hear Sonam Kapoor earlier talk about how much Indian filmmakers love coming to London. Some of that is about the technology they find here and the capability. But you just have to look at Natu Natu and Triple R and the movie that was created there to see a masterpiece in many ways of mixing Indian creativity, the Indian style of filmmaking, with incredible CGI and artistry around there. Even in theatre and music, in theatre we have this lovely new Nita Mukesh Ambani Centre in Mumbai, and its physical tech there, they have this incredible crystal, 1,000 crystals or so on the ceiling, which can be programmed to display images on the ceiling while theatre is happening in front of you, in a very high-tech theatre that's been created there, something that is, I don't think I've seen in the West End, and that's happening here. And our good friend Tim Brinkman is the creative director there, who's come from the West End to sort of implement some of those techniques there. And there's the second bucket, which is entirely new canvases, entirely new mediums of creativity that have been created by the digital world. And I think I'm being as bold to say we need to see people like Sachin as artists, and his great coders in companies like that, because really they're creating spaces where creativity can be expressed in new ways. For example, the metaverse, it's a catch-all, but there are UK-India collaborations happening in the metaverse. A company called VTime from the UK who are exploring opportunities there and building some fantastic collaborations. And we've heard a couple of times already today about mobile phones and the availability of smartphones in India. 700 million is the latest figure I've heard. I'm sure there are various estimates on it, but you can imagine the creativity is in people's hands, but also the ability to receive that creativity. And there's a fantastic online gaming company called Quali, who have got a fantastic establishment in Bangalore, and have just hit 1 billion downloads of their games this year, based on a UK-India collaboration from Leamington Spa in the Midlands, which is close to where my parents live, where there's a fantastic gaming cluster to Bangalore, and some of the fantastic coders and artists I was saying there. So that's why we're so excited about it as government, and a little bit of a sort of picture there. The G20 being one platform there, and obviously with colleagues at the British Council, working together with India and the presidency there on preservation of culture, looking back and using technology to help us look back, and some great proponents of that here, but also looking forwards in the creative economies of the future that I've just described, and I think there's some fantastic opportunities there. And worth noting, because we didn't hear the Secretary of State earlier, but we've just launched in the UK our creative industries sector strategy, which I know us on the trade side and you guys on the British Council side work on very closely together. And one very small part of that is we'll take a trade mission of UK companies out in November this year to a big creative tech festival in India. So please let us know if you're interested in that.
Thank you so much. So a very, very intense contribution, I think, from this fabulous panel, and I think it's a very short space of time to discuss some very deep and global challenges and opportunities. I hope that you will grab them in the break and speak to them or connect with them on social media, with your digital training perhaps. What we've heard about is memory matters. We've also heard about how our minds seek disruption. From Bettany, thank you very much. So thank you for the Nehru Centre for hosting us here today. I've thoroughly enjoyed sharing 2 panels with you today, and I've really enjoyed going to other aspects of the India-UK Forum this week, and I'm looking forward to attending more. Please join me in thanking our fabulous panellists.